Well, we are delighted to welcome back the distinguished presidential historian, Michael Beschloss. Mr. Beschloss served as a trustee of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, and many associated with Monticello have had the pleasure of seeing him here often. He's perhaps most familiar to you as a regular and knowledgeable commentator on the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, and also as NBC's first presidential historian. He's received the State of Illinois' Order of Lincoln, the Harry S. Truman Public Service Award, the Ambassador Book Prize, and the New York State Archives History Award. Mr. Beschloss studied political science at Williams College and leadership at Harvard University's School of Business. Mr. Beschloss would probably say that the course of his life was charted by his Williams College senior honor thesis that became his first book, Kennedy and Roosevelt, The Uneasy Alliance. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Beschloss in a moment, but I first have to remind you that he's also the best-selling author of 8 books, all dealing with presidents and the presidency from 1789 to 1989, Washington to the first President Bush. Mr. Beschloss is comfortable talking about all of the presidents, but he is best known for his analysis of Lyndon Johnson, Franklin Roosevelt, and Harry Truman. His current project is a history of Abraham Lincoln's last days and assassination. I would like to ask Mr. Beschloss if any other presidents shared Mr. Jefferson's keen sense of the significance of history. Jefferson urged his fellow citizens to preserve documents relating to the history of our country, and his more than 19,000 surviving letters are testament to what he wrote in 1816, and I quote, "The letters I have written while in public office are in fact memorials of the transactions with which I have been associated, and may at a future day furnish something to the historian." And now I would like to ask Alice Handy, chairman of our board and a good friend of Mr. Beschloss, to do the introduction.
And now, Michael, without further ado, to our family's personal friend, as well as a very, very dear friend of the foundation and former trustee, Michael Beschloss.
Thank you very much, Alice, and thank you, Leslie. It's the first time in my life I've had 2 introductions. I'm going to get addicted to this in the future, but makes the day all the more enjoyable. I'm going to try to make this very brief. Hubert Humphrey used to give speeches, I think, in about increments of about 3 hours, Jerry, at a time. And once, even he knew he had gone on too long, which must have been really long. And he yelled out to the audience, "Anyone here got a watch?" And someone yelled back, "How about a calendar?" So in light of the weather and everything else, I'm going to make this as brief as possible. Actually, it was Humphrey himself who once said that he thought the measure of a society was the way that a society treats its elderly and its sick. And I think he was absolutely right. But there are other measures of a society, and I think Annette will not disagree with this. I think one important measure of a society is how it treats its historic sites. And I think by what we're doing here today, we're demonstrating that our society meets that test with flying colors. The first time I ever went to a historic site was, unfortunately, not Monticello. I grew up in Illinois. I went to Abraham Lincoln's house in Springfield, which still stands and has been restored. And I was about 8 years old, and I remember going into the parlor, and I got to ask the guide a question. And I wish, given what I did later in life, I asked him about Lincoln on civil liberties or something about Lincoln's military strategy, but I was 8 years old and I asked something that was a little bit more interesting to me at the time. I asked him, when Lincoln's sons were naughty, did he spank them? And as I remember, the guide said with this disgusted look on his face, "No, Lincoln didn't believe in discipline. He just let those brats run wild through this house." And I heard that Lincoln was the man for me. I began reading everything I could find on Lincoln and other presidents, and had a lot to do with my becoming a presidential historian. But that's the effect that an historic site can really have. We've seen it so often here at Monticello. But, you know, We have an advantage here at Monticello. Lincoln's house to this day, and certainly did not then have a visitor center. Today, we at Monticello do. And I remember just about the first time I was here at Monticello, I guess maybe the third time, I was here with David McCullough, our great friend and trustee. We were talking about the fact that if you knew absolutely nothing about Thomas Jefferson and walked through the house here, if you knew nothing about George Washington and walked through Mount Vernon, by the end of your trip you'd know so much about the people who had so much to do with shaping these houses. As McCullough has said, it's like walking through here Thomas Jefferson's autobiography. And I think it's not a bad metaphor, because when you read the autobiography of a great leader, it is much more helpful to understand it if you're also reading a biography of the great leader. So in a way, we can think of this plantation as Thomas Jefferson's autobiography, and this visitor center as his biography that's going to enable future generations to understand what they're seeing a lot better.